Mike. How are
Hi,
you? Thank.
not too bad. Good to see you. You're looking you're looking great.
It's very, very
Pretty
good
much here
for me
now.
to see you too because it has been a very long time since you last were on my YouTube channel, and this time we are here on Zoom on a Zoom meeting to discuss about your Fire Maker. So the work you published with the Discovery Institute Press in 2016, where you explore the importance of fire in the history of humankind. So, from computers to airplanes, from medicines to modern technology, all this has to do with fire. In a way, you explain in the book. In the book. So, the first question, Mike, I would like to ask you is, as usual, what is fire? This time, fire from a scientific, empirical point of view.
Yeah. Well, fire is the chemical reaction between oxygen and carbon and hydrogen. And normally, when we talk about combustion, the carbon and hydrogen are reduced compounds in wood and fossil fuels, coal and things like this. And so the oxygen reacts with the carbon and the hydrogen in these compounds, generating a lot of heat and energy. And that's released as what we call fire. That's what it is. Yeah. Yeah. So fire is a chemical reaction between oxygen and hydrogen and carbon atoms, generally in organic compounds such as wood, and then of course also fossil fuels. Yeah. So
So,
that's what
from a
fire is.
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, from a chemical reaction to a very important mean for the human mankind, for the history of man on this planet. So, the second question is the following one. And first of all, I would like to show your book because I didn't make it before. So, that's your book, Fire Maker, which
Yeah.
is very, I would say, very easy to understand because you always publish your book in a very understandable way for a public who is not expert, and this is a very, very,
Yeah.
very great way to communicate for science communications. So, second question. At the beginning of the first chapter of your book, you mention some of the most important discoveries of humankind in the past 100 years: the structure of DNA, the structure of the universe, the beginning of time, the observation of galaxies, the discovery of other Earths orbiting around distant stars. So there has been a very great progress since the beginning of the 20th century. And you comment, there was one primal discovery that made the realization of all this possible. It's a discovery we use every day and take completely for granted. But this discovery changed everything. Humankind discovered how to make and tame fire. So, at first sight, one could maybe not understand this proposition, but the explanation you give makes all clear since you explain how fire is connected, for example, with the first industry and metallurgy. Then you describe the singular path followed by man to advance from the beginning of mankind to modern technology, from fire to charcoal, ceramics, kilns, and metallurgy itself. So,
Yeah.
could you give us a brief idea about the connection between fire, technology, and modern science?
Yeah. Well, first of all, as Darwin said, probably the greatest discovery, accepting language, ever made by man was fire. And the reason is that it was fire that opened the door to a whole series of technologies, which led ultimately through cooking, through ceramics. That's hardening clay and substances like that to make pottery in a fire. Uh, and then, of course, to get hotter temperatures, you use a vented kiln. That's where you pump air into the fire, essentially. Um, and and basically, you go through this series. This is the series that humans took. It's rather remarkable. It's a remarkable sequence of events. Fire, then ceramics, kilns to make ceramics, and then eventually the discovery that the heat that you can get in a kiln is sufficient to smelt metals. The easiest metal to smelt is copper, which doesn't require temperatures much above, I think it's 1,000 centigrade. To get metal, you need very hot kilns. And generally speaking, those kilns require the substance charcoal. Now, charcoal is basically just it's wood, as it were, cooked and heated in an anoxic environment. And that when you burn charcoal in a kiln, you get higher temperatures, and those temperatures allow you to get to smelt iron from its ores. So you've got this sequence. It's a magic sequence, and it basically, to me, it's the only sequence of events that's fire, cooking, ceramics, hot kilns, making charcoal to make even hotter kilns, and then finally discovery of metallurgy. And they were the series of events that occurred on Earth. And basically, I would insist that they are the only series of events that any intelligent, sort of carbon-based, air-breathing organism anywhere in the universe could have advanced from the Stone Age to the Industrial Revolution and then the 21st century. So you've got these very interesting series of events. I think that's probably basically answering your question. I think that, in fact, the reason that fire is so important is it opened the door
Yeah.
to all these subsequent events in history and took us from the Stone Age to the Industrial Revolution via, importantly, the final discovery of metals. Yeah. Because without metals, I don't think any intelligent beings anywhere in the universe can do much.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you need metals. So
Ha-
yeah. So
yeah.
yeah.
So thank you. And there is much more than this because the third point, it's very great in my opinion. So the connection between respiration and fire and the atmosphere, because as you write, nature lent a hand for the human rise to civilization and technology. A very important point you highlight in chapter number 2, which is entitled "The Right Planet," the right planet. So very,
Yeah.
very important word is that our atmosphere supports both respiration and fire. And you you write, although it is not widely appreciated, the atmospheric conditions necessary for respiration and those for combustion are different. It is quite possible for a planet to have an atmosphere that supports fire but not respiration, one that supports respiration but not combustion, or one that supports neither. So, you emphasize the role of the right value of atmospheric pressure in all this. Could you say something about this?
Yes. Um, if you're a highly intelligent carbon-based being, you're going to be utilizing oxidations to generate metabolic energy. And in the case of humans, we function between a partial pressure in the atmosphere of 160 millimeters of mercury right up to the Everest base camp, where the partial pressure is roughly 80. It's roughly half that actually. Okay, and humans can live and function in that with partial pressures of oxygen from sea level to the Everest base camp. And within that region as well, we have fire. For fire, you need more than 12 in an oxygen nitrogen atmosphere like we have on the Earth. You need more than 12% oxygen in the atmosphere to have fire. Anything above 12% and you have fire. It's the percentage of oxygen in the atmosphere which determines whether you have fire or not. When you go above the Everest base camp, right up and above Everest, you can still have fire. because it is combustion ultimately, which jet engines are using to fly across the top of Mount Everest, right? But there's one thing's for sure, you can't breathe up there. Um, although the actual amount of oxygen in the atmosphere is still about 21% as it is on Earth, you can't breathe there because the partial pressure of the oxygen is far less. And you can't load the hemoglobin with oxygen in the lungs on low partial pressures. So basically, yes, that's right. On Earth, we have majority of the Earth has a partial pressure of oxygen which supports human respiration, sea level to the Everest base camp, and it also supports fire as well. Because in fact we have 21% oxygen in the atmosphere, which means that fire is certainly very feasible and so forth. But as I've mentioned already, you can have a situation where you can have fire and you don't have respiration. That's above the summit of Mount Everest, and you can create artificial atmospheres where you can breathe easily. The partial pressure of oxygen is sufficient to load the hemoglobin with oxygen in the lungs, but the actual percentage of oxygen is less, and so you can't have fire. Yeah, so but we on the Earth are blessed with an atmosphere which supports both advanced organisms like us, gives us enough oxygen to generate, our metabolic energy we need, um, and also enables us to make a fire. Yeah. So that's the first. See, when we look at this list of, you go from fire to ceramics to metallurgy. So the first thing we found is that in fact there has to be fine tuning in the universe for beings of our metabolic need to make a fire. And the fine tuning is such that in the case of the Earth's atmosphere, it's just right for our respiration and for making fire. Okay, I've repeated that a few
That's
times.
great.
Okay, yeah,
So the next question is a very funny one. I find it very funny to discuss. So you talk in your book about spontaneous combustion because
yeah.
the Earth had a very, very, very catastrophic past. So my question now is, why don't we spontaneously combust now?
Okay.
I, I simpl
Well,
I simplified my question in order
yeah.
to
Well,
be
that's thanks.
more clear.
Thanks for simplifying. We don't combust really because, in fact, for so another fine tuning element which enable us to make and manipulate fire. First of all, this is because the vigor of the chemical reaction between oxygen and hydrogen and carbon in organic compounds is attenuated and is very much reduced under ambient temperatures of under 50 centigrade. Um, as you know, these days, once the temperature goes up to the upper 40s and into the 50s, fire becomes almost inevitable, and a whole forest will burn quickly once the temperature's near 50 degrees centigrade, and you can't do anything about it. But basically, for most of the world, the temperature is not above 50 centigrade, and that's where we inhabit as humans. So basically, the oxygen that we breathe in the body and the oxygen all around us, the vigor of the reaction is greatly attenuated. And in fact, it's so greatly attenuated that in the body, to activate oxygen, you need to utilize the transition metals in the body. They're utilized to activate oxygen in the body for chemical reactions. So, so that's one thing. So that's one thing which prevents spontaneous combustion, right? We don't spontaneously burst into flames.
But it
Um,
happened in the past.
sorry?
It happened in the past of the Earth, isn't it?
Um,
There was a
no, that's
there was a catastrophic past because there was this happening in the Carboniferous.
Oh
Uh,
yes, that's not that's the oxygen remain the properties of oxygen or the attenuation of oxygen under
yeah.
50 centimeters. That's a universal. It applies throughout time and space. Anywhere where there's oxygen, it applies. The reason there was huge fires in the Carboniferous is it seems that the oxygen level went from 21% to 30%.
Yeah.
And so basically, that's the reason for those catastrophic fires. Um, and of course, once the fire starts, the temperature goes way above 50 centigrade. It goes to 1,500. And in fact, some of the Australian forest fires actually melt the hubcaps of cars. It's so hot. And so once that starts, it's self-sustaining. So the heat activates more and more oxygen, and the fire just spreads out like that. Um, but in most conditions, when its temperature is below 50 and there's not a forest fire, you're safe with oxygen because of this attenuation. It's called a spin restriction. But it's another example of the fine tuning of nature for that magic sequence with fire. Now, the other reason that we don't really have one of the reasons we can control fire and it's safe is because the nitrogen in the atmosphere is a powerful fire retardant, and that massively decreases the speed at which fires spread. And probably the combination of the attenuation of the chemical vigor of oxygen plus the existence of a fire retardant in our atmosphere, i.e. nitrogen, that was why humans could safely utilize fire. It doesn't spread uncontrollably. And the level of oxygen in the atmosphere of 21% doesn't lead to the carboniferous type fires of the past when it was 30%. All these are factors which allowed our ancestors to start utilizing fire and managing fire for whatever purposes they needed. It's a very powerful chemical reaction, but it's controllable because of the attenuation under 50 and also because of the existence of nitrogen. Yeah.
The fifth question was a question to which you already answered, I think, because you quote an astonishing element of fitness in nature, which is the fact that the Earth has the right size, is a right-sized planet, and it has a very deep connection with the fire and human body. So I prepared here a quotation from your book.
Okay.
Only on planet of similar mass and size to the Earth's could there exist an atmosphere containing sufficient quantities of oxygen to sustain fire. A Goldilocks planet like ours that is just right in size and gravity to provide an atmosphere supportive of fire and human respiration is also just right for the existence of carbon-based organisms of our size and design, possessing an upright bipedal posture. So this is
Yeah.
something you already mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as well as the attenuation of oxygen, as well as the existence of nitrogen, the fire retardant in the atmosphere, um, basically just to step back so you need to have fire, you need wood. And for
Yeah.
wood, you need photosynthesis. And we've already discussed the fantastic fine tuning of nature for photosynthesis. And you need large trees because you can't make a hot fire with grass. If you want metallurgy, you've got to make charcoal, and generally speaking, you've got to have wood. Big trees require the properties of water to draw. One of them is its high surface tension, which draws the water to the top of the tree. And the other reason that you also need the properties of water because you need the hydrological cycle because in fact you can only make fire on the land. And so to get big trees growing on the land for our use, you need the hydrological cycle, which depends on, as we've already seen in the wonder of water, depends on an extraordinary set of properties of water. So I'm getting back to your point, but I'm just
Yeah.
breaking in here to say that this sequence, this magic sequence, this unique sacred sequence, which leads from fire to metallurgy in the 21st century. It depends on photosynthesis. It depends on fine tuning for photosynthesis. It depends on fine tuning for life on the land and so forth. Okay. Now let's come to the size of the Earth. Basically, big planets like Jupiter and Saturn retain hydrogen and helium. Whereas very small planets like Mars, they lose all their atmosphere, including oxygen and carbon dioxide. So they lose basically, well, let's just constantly, they lose oxygen for a start, right? And so basically, you can't have fire. It's just you can't have fire. You can't have fire on Jupiter. Well, I suppose that in fact high enough temperature. I'm not sure whether you could have a fire in a helium um, hydrogen atmosphere. Hydrogen, of course, would burn, but certainly you can't imagine beings on a planet like the size of a huge planet with its primeval atmosphere making a fire. I don't believe this is possible. And you can't imagine people making a fire on Mars because it's lost its oxygen. It did have some oxygen once, but its size allowed it to disperse. So the gravitational force of a planet determines the atmospheric conditions. And for an atmosphere like Earth, which has got oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen, you require the gravity roughly approximately the same as the Earth to hold those heavier gases in the atmosphere. So that's the first thing. So the first thing is that the size of the Earth is compatible with an atmosphere which is fit for beings like us to breathe oxygen and to make a fire. And it's got the nitrogen retardant and so forth. So there's fine tuning for that in nature. So what about our size, right? Well, to make a fire, an ant can't make a fire. You've got to be a certain size to make a fire. And if you take the hewing the wood, you need to be a certain size to cut down a tree and get, relatively large chunks of wood to make a hot fire. So basically, what does the gravity of the Earth have to do with the size of the organism? Well, it's because of this, because in fact, biological muscles are based on the movement of filaments. Okay, and it just so happens to be a fact that in all organisms, muscles have virtually exactly the same design. They're moving filaments, and those filaments are moved along each other by molecular motors, which depend on chemical bonds. Now, those chemical bonds are universally the same throughout the universe, and the packing of the filaments is almost to a crystalline level. Well, the power exerted by a muscle is proportional to the area, the area of the muscle. Okay, so the area of the actual muscle fiber is proportional to the power of the muscle. Ants can carry 4 or 5 times their weight because while the power of a muscle is determined by L squared in a sense, L cubed gives you the mass. And so the mass of an organism increases much faster than the actual power of its muscles. That's why an ant's more powerful proportionately than we are. So it's a close call. Organisms of our size have muscles of a sufficient strength to do all sorts of things, and we can stand upright as a bipedal sort of being. But if the muscles were slightly weaker, we wouldn't be able to do that. So in other words, in fact, the gravity of the Earth is sufficient, given the constraints on the muscle power and the power of biological muscles. It's fit. The gravitational force of the Earth is fit to allow us to stand up. That's essentially what it amounts to. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what. Yeah.
Thank you. We have the last question, which is the question I love most. And it has to do with fitness in nature. So, fire and fuel alone would be totally useless if there was no creator capable of taming them and exploiting them for industry and life, as you told us before.
Yeah.
And this, of course, this being is man. No other living species on Earth can master fire. In our previous interviews, as you remember, we have always spoken about man. And this is also the case with the present book. A very interesting quotation is the following one. So, in your book, you write, it was our unique upright android design and possession of that supreme manipulative instrument, the human hand, which in conjunction with our high intelligence enabled our species to manipulate and master fire and develop over subsequent centuries and advanced technology. And also elsewhere you write, only biological beings similar to modern humans, possessed of our android design and conscious creative agency on a planet similar to the Earth, could ever have exploited the wonderful fitness of nature for fire and metallurgy. This suggests that if there are extraterrestrial civilization possessed of an advanced technology, they will have followed the same route, resemble closely beings of our biology, and inhabit a world similar to the Earth. So you told us many. You gave us many explanation about the right size of human muscle and so on. Is there something you want to add to because the considerations about in fitness in nature, fire, or
Well, basically, I think that it's a fascinating thing that in fact the what I'm insisting is the only route you can go from the Stone Age to a modern civilization is the route that our ancestors took. And we've mentioned it.
yeah.
First of all, it's managing fire, and then it's making kilns, making hot kilns, and then finding that ores. And there's a lot of fitness in nature which allows this to occur, from photosynthesis to plate tectonics generates the ores, concentrates ores and things, so forth. So that's great. But you need a being that can build a kiln, that can mine for ores, that can cut wood, and is big enough to go near a fire and manipulate the actual fire itself. And you need to do that, you need something like arms, and of course you need something as amazing as the hand, which allows you to start fire from various frictional techniques, right? So the hand is the ultimate manipulative organ on the planet. And we have very good eyesight, actually. Only the raptors, only eagles and buzzards and things, only the raptors have better eyesight than humans. We have very good eyesight. So we have very good eyes to watch what we're doing. We have the unique manipulative organ to put things together, to manipulate the fire, and we're the right size. A small dog, a cat, or an ant can't manipulate fire. They can't get close to it. They can't handle it. So we're the right size. We've got the right organs to do it. And this line of fitness, as it were, this mysterious fitness in nature, which allows you to go from the Stone Age to our modern civilization, which depends on a huge amount of fine-tuning in nature in all sorts of ways, atmospheres, photosynthesis, and so forth. So yes, basically that's an amazing. It's something very beautiful about this, that we have just the anatomy to exploit all this fitness in nature. Without we didn't exist, it would have no purpose. So the human form is, as it were, it's where this was leading. It's like a mysterious thing. All those fitnesses were leading to a being like man that could exploit the fitnesses in nature. So it's extremely beautiful. You can ask another question actually. Basically, so this fitness was in nature at the moment of creation, and this is a profound fact, because it means if you're a theist and you believe that the universe was created by an intelligent being, that intelligent being must have had our being in his mind and the route from the Stone Age all the way through to the 21st century. That must have been in God's mind from the very beginning. And whether in fact, and that of course suggests that the anthropocentric view is not unrealistic. It's not an alternative reality. It's based on a ruthlessly rational assessment of the way nature is. We are it. We are the
Yeah.
beings that can exploit that route and learn and have deep understanding of nature through the scientific revolution which came from that at the end of that chain of events. But as a Christian, you can ask another question. What was the point of making humans? Because one of the things that in fact atheists and agnostics are always throwing at you is, but look at all the suffering in the world.
Hmm.
Look at all this suffering. How could God be good? God could only show his goodness by divesting himself of supreme power and omnipotence. And what better way of doing it than coming in human form, you know, and riding on a donkey on Palm Sunday into Jerusalem. So basically, in fact, you can, I mean, I think the idea that at the moment of creation, God had mankind in view leads to that next question. But why man? Why were we made? And you could argue, I think, that we were made ultimately to reveal the nature of God, and that God is good without power. So anyway, that's something which has always occurred to me recently. That the purpose of all this fitness in nature and all the fitness we've discussed in previous podcasts is not just there for mankind. Mankind isn't the end and purpose. There's something else. And I mean, the Christian doctrine of the incarnation seems to satisfy something else, something beyond humans themselves. Anyway, that's. I hope that's not too extreme. I think it's something that's been occurring to me. It's my perception of this of the whole fitness thing. And the thing about fitness compared with any other evidence for design is fitness was in nature at the very moment of creation itself. It's in the very fabric of things. Whereas you can say, well, there's lots of fantastic designs in nature, um, uh, all sorts of extraordinary adaptations, but they are subsequent to the origin of the universe. They weren't there in the beginning. But the fitness for carbon-based life, fitness for beings of our biology, fitness to make fire, fitness to come to understand the universe, all that fine-tuning was in nature at the very moment of creation itself. I find that an extraordinary thought. You know, it's an extraordinary thought that you can sort of read the mind of God through the sort of stuff we've been talking about. I hope this is not too over the top.
No, thank you, Mike. Because I was thinking about a question I used to ask to myself many times, which has to do with the connection between matter and natural laws. So the question is, but it is a question for me too. I believe I have the answer. So are the laws of nature superior to pure matter, or are they intrinsic to matter? I don't know if you got the point. So, are the laws of nature, the physical laws, the physical constants, intrinsic in matter, or are they superior? Do they guide matter? I think that's my
I think the
idea.
prior. I
Sorry.
think the
Yeah.
prior
So
or
yeah.
superior. Yeah,
Prior
I
and
agree.
superior,
Yeah.
ontologically superior.
And then we can think of something else as well, because I'm inclined to I'm very sympathetic with Aristotelian's view of form and matter,
Yeah.
because I think that in fact basically forms are much more fundamental than modern materialistic science accepts, right? And I see the various forms of life on Earth as almost certainly something prior to matter itself. So, that's the same sort of thing, yeah. And in my own work I did some work in this area
Yeah.
on protein some years ago, right? And basically, proteins seem to fold into a mysterious energy minima. And these energy minima are like Aristotelian forms. They're prior to the matter taking up the form, if you see what I mean. So that the protein matter folds into a limited number of forms, which are determined by the laws of nature, energy minima, or whatever you want to say. And these were prior to the existence of any protein. It's a somewhat radical view, but I think it's probably correct. Yes. So what you said is correct. These things are prior to the properties of matter. Yeah, they
Is it
determine it. Yeah.
so? If there is a project, and I believe firmly there is a project about as these all ideas, all forms, because in Greek form and is idea and form are the same thing, have to be in God's mind before the creation, as you said before. So I do agree. From maybe from not maybe from all eternity, and then there was this creation, this project about us. So it is not pure matter which is governing itself, but there are laws which are, as we said, superior, ontologically superior, and prior to matter, which rule. I think you in English say to rule something, rule the material universe. So
Yeah, that's correct.
that's the
That's
point.
basically correct. Yeah, we obviously have the same philosophical outlook there. Yeah, yeah, sure. That's right. Yeah. So basically, I mean, I was involved in a big Templeton Foundation submission, in about 20 years ago now, which was supported by Paul Wasson, who was the scientific editor at the time. Um, but unfortunately, I think the idea of it was that in fact it's called structuralism. It's basically Aristotle. It's the idea that in fact there's a limited number of possible forms of biological systems. It's so that in fact living things are not contingent assemblages of matter. They have a special status. Um, so, and one of the things that convinced me there's something in this is, I mean, this is wandering a bit from this particular podcast, but one of the things I did a lot of work on the genetics of retinal cells and published a lot of papers on it, right? And basically, the photoreceptors in the eye are some of the most complex cells in nature. And the question is there a blueprint somehow? If you think that living things are contingent assemblages of matter built by, say, natural selection over time, there's got to be a blueprint, because you can't get repeated contingent assemblages without a blueprint, right? But of course, if the form of the photoreceptors is somehow like energy minima based in nature and is prior to the evolution of the eye, even, right? Then basically, you don't need a blueprint because matter is, as it were, pouring into a pre-existing mold or form. That's certainly what my inclination is, that this is probably correct. Because the photoreceptor is fantastically complex. And when we started looking for genes that disrupt its form, you find that the only mutations you can find disrupt basic housekeeping genes in the cell. So there's no set of sort of morpho genes or genetic program evident in this. All that happens is you score mutations in housekeeping genes in the cell, and sort of to do with the metabolism of the cell, to do with the cell membrane, and so forth like this. But there's no clue anywhere that there's a special set of genes, or i.e. making up a genetic program which shapes matter into the form of the cell. It emerges by the self-organization of its constituents. And so my feeling is that, in fact, there is some sort of set of organic forms, like Aristotelian forms, which exist in nature and existed in the mind of God at the beginning, into which matter, as it were, flows and is directed. Anyway, Sorry, Marco. This is complex stuff, but